The question is the bill be now read the second time. I call the member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I rise to speak on the Education and Teaching Legislation Amendment Bill 2016. On behalf of the Greens, I ask the Education Spokesperson. And I note the contribution of the Shadow Minister for Education and that the Minister particularly was here a short time ago. This bill amends three major pieces of legislation that govern schools and education in New South Wales: the Board of Studies Teaching and Educational Standards Act 2013, the Education Act 1990 and Teacher Accreditation Act 2004. Whilst in many respects this legislation merely reflects the authority that already exists with BOSTES, it provides the additional powers of random inspections and is grounded in a governance and management theory model that in our view does not engender safe, settled learning environments. I do need to say at the outset that we do not oppose the bill. We see that there are lots of positive things, but there are aspects that we are concerned about and that we wish to raise amendments in the other place. The Greens understand that respectful relationships in learning environments are at the heart of positive student outcomes. And it is felt that, and it has certainly been communicated to me as the education spokesperson by a huge number of stakeholders and constituents, that the attitude of the Minister, which was borne out in his media comments and his second read speech, of random compliance audits, and if a school's doing the wrong thing, be very afraid, belie a deficit and fear-based view of learning environments that we do reject. Having a regulator to ensure compliance and standards is expected, as all students in this state deserve the best, and their families expect the best, and teachers and educators want the best for them, and they deserve to work in the best possible learning communities. However, a fear and punishment approach is completely at odds with what we know engenders the best outcomes for school communities: trust, adequate resourcing, support and respect. We welcome the changes to the board, as the current board has only 2 teachers sitting on a board of 23 members, and the new governance model allows for greater representation from stakeholders who work at the coalface of teaching and learning. The potential inclusion of parents, teachers and principals at the committee stage is also an improvement. I'll now speak to the bill. The New South Wales Education Standards Authority will remain a single independent statutory authority and will retain all of the current functions of the Board of Studies, Teaching and Education Standards. The bill clarifies that a principal objective of the Education Standards Authority is to drive improvements in the standards of school education. This involves recommending improvements to schools and school systems and changes to government policy where necessary. A governing body will be established to provide leadership in improving standards of school education across the state and overseeing the authority's performance. The governing board will be guided by an annual ministerial statement of expectation to ensure that the authority is clearly focused and delivers on its objectives. The size of the governing board will be reduced from 23 to 12 to 14 members. The board will be comprised of members from across the different school sectors: Aboriginal Education, the New South Wales Teachers Federation, Independent Teachers Union, universities, vocational education, parents, early childhood education, special education, business and strategic advisory skills, and rural and remote representation. We welcome this. The board will exercise its function through 5 decision-making regulatory committees. The committees will focus on teacher accreditation and registered professional learning, syllabus development and curriculum engagement, technical assessment issues, school registration and assessment, and initial teacher education accreditation. The existing Quality Teaching Council will be replaced. The bill aims to reduce the regulatory burden associated with the registration of schools on both the authority and schools. The registration process will focus on quality of learning rather than on the existing administrative or process-driven approach to compliance. The authority will be able to undertake random and risk-based audits and unannounced inspections. The government system will now also be subject to random and risk-based audits and spot checks by the authority in the same way that non-government schools and non-government systems are. The authority's new powers to conduct random risk-based audits and spot checks will also apply to quality assurance arrangements for teacher accreditation authorities. I was going to go through the amendments to the 3 pieces of legislation. I think I won't. because we've had a very detailed second read, and I think I'd rather just take what time I have left to discuss the areas that we feel need to be looked at again. And primarily, Mr. Acting Speaker, that is section 14.2a. It is the Greens' position that section 14.2a needs to be amended to allow for procedural fairness. We'll be seeking amendments in the other place to insert a requirement that at least 5 days' notice be given before the authority inspects the premises, and that the nature of the non-compliance be identified to allow the person or body to suitably prepare. We understand, however, that in cases of genuine urgency, where the authority would be remiss in its duty to protect children and young people or to respond to serious matters where time is of the essence, that the authority should be able to do so. But we do not think that random compliance checks for non-urgent matters will engender improvements in learning settings. In fact, it has the potential to set up a bullying and fear-based culture in schools and learning settings, which was foreshadowed by my colleague. Let's say we wanted to embrace the Minister's governance and management model for schools, which are at odds with very much evidence-based research on the kinds of learning environments that teachers and students thrive in. But let's say we agreed that the model, with the model. How does this sit with the management of employees in any other sector? Imagine I walk into my electorate office and randomly conduct a performance review of my staff, and I don't tell them what it will be about or what aspect of their incredibly diverse job description I'll be reviewing. They get no notice and no time to prepare. I can assure you, Mr. Acting Speaker, that the Parliament would have something to say to me about administrative principles of due notice, reasonable notice, procedural fairness, and just plain old poor management. Why then is the Minister not even applying basic management principles of due notice and procedural fairness to one of the most diverse working environments in the state? Would a random audit of my staff give me a cohesive and complete picture of their work? Would my random inspection engender a spirit of professional trust and collegiality? I think not. Analysts suggest that the new section 14.2a is modelled on the UK's version of our Ofsted, which is the inspection authority in the United Kingdom. The provision in the UK legislation was drafted in 2012 in direct response to an allegation that a nest of terrorists had infiltrated an English school, which Ofsted argued they could not investigate properly if they had to give the school a notice of inspection. The law was changed in the UK to allow that. I don't propose to go into here why Ofsted and not a counter-terrorism unit might be the appropriate authority to investigate, but suffice to say that there was no finding of terrorist activities in the school, but rather a very poor and disadvantaged school community. But Ofsted kept the no-notice provision until 2005, but they amended it after significant professional and community backlash. Under the current UK legislation, schools are usually notified around midday on the working day prior to the start of a routine school inspection. Schools previously rated inadequate for behaviour may be subject to no-notice inspections, as may schools about which there are significant concerns. If the Minister is looking towards the UK for precedents, then this may assist his thinking about the blanket no-notice provision. The Greens urge the Minister to amend section 14.2 and allow for serious matters to be inspected without notice, but allow due process for non-urgent matters. What I'm sure none of us want to see is a culture of bullying in learning communities, and if we are not careful, this model may engender just that. When the Teacher Assessment and Review Schedule, TARS, was introduced in New South Wales, there were many overzealous supervisors who used it to place unprofessional and unreasonable demands on subordinates. Even though the department made it very clear in the wording of the review process that TARS was not intended to be used in a punitive fashion, it had the potential and it did happen. What potential is there then for the notion of random compliance checks being used as a bullying tactic? We will need to carefully monitor this if the no-notice provision prevails. One of the questions I want to finish on is about the morale of students, teachers and parents within a learning community when deficit and fear-based models are applied to teaching and learning. What sort of demeanour do you want the teacher of your child to have? Does this model engender safe, settled learning environments? Respectful relationships are a prerequisite for that kind of learning environment, and we encourage the Minister to look at a whole school as the sum of its parts and do everything he can to support respectful relationships and professional trust.